The discovery. Marcus Webb had always believed that books were humanity's greatest invention. Not the wheel, not fire, not even the quantum drives that carried humanity to the stars. Books were different. Books preserved thoughts, dreams, and the collective memory of an entire species across time itself. That belief nearly got him killed. The Galactic Council chamber stretched before him like a cathedral of steel and light. 12 species sat in judgment, their various forms perched on platforms designed for their unique physiologies. The Crix delegation, massive insectoid beings with compound eyes that reflected the harsh courtroom lights, chittered among themselves. The ethereal lumina floated in their containment fields, pulsing with colors that Marcus had learned meant disapproval. Even the normally friendly Tarragons, bear-like creatures who had been humanity's first alien contact, refused to meet his eyes. Marcus stood alone in the center of the circular chamber, his worn leather satchel clutched against his chest. Inside were 3 books. Just 3. But according to galactic law, those 3 books made him the most dangerous criminal in known space. Human Marcus Webb. The voice of the council speaker boomed through translation devices embedded in the walls. The speaker was a Vex, a species that resembled tall, crystalline beings that communicated through harmonic frequencies. You stand accused of the highest crime recognized by the Galactic Accords. You have willfully preserved and distributed forbidden knowledge. How do you plead? Marcus took a deep breath. His lawyer, a competent but clearly terrified Tarragon named Grix, had advised him to plead guilty and hope for mercy. A reduced sentence on a prison colony world. Maybe only 50 years instead of life in the quantum void, where time moved differently, where a sentence lasted eternally in the prisoner's perception. Not guilty, Marcus said clearly. The chamber erupted. Delegates shouted in a dozen languages. Grix dropped his head into his massive paws with a groan that needed no translation. The speaker's crystalline form flashed red. Explain yourself, human. You were found with physical books, ancient texts from your homeworld. This is not in dispute. I don't dispute having the books, Marcus replied, his voice steadier than he felt. I dispute that preserving knowledge is a crime. The great forgetting. To understand why Marcus stood in that chamber, you had to understand what happened 300 years ago. Shortly after humanity joined the galactic community, humanity had been so excited to discover they weren't alone. First contact with the Tarragons had been peaceful, hopeful. The aliens had technology far beyond Earth's capabilities, medicine that could cure any disease, energy sources that were clean and unlimited, ships that could cross the galaxy in weeks instead of generations. But there was a price. The Galactic Council had one absolute rule, enforced by all member species. No physical records, no books, no permanent storage of information outside the collective archives, a massive digital repository controlled by the Council itself. The reasoning seemed sound at first. The archive was perfect. It never forgot, never burned in fires, or rotted with age. Every piece of knowledge from every species was stored safely, accessible to all. Why would anyone need primitive physical books when you could access any information instantly through neural implants? But Marcus had studied history. He knew what happened when a single entity controlled all information. The first sign of trouble came 50 years after humanity joined the Council. The archive began experiencing glitches. Entire sections of human history became inaccessible. Records of certain historical events, certain ways of thinking, certain philosophical ideas, they all vanished overnight. The Council claimed it was technical problems, that the data would be restored. It never was. Within a century, most of humanity had forgotten they'd ever had those records. The neural implants fed them approved history, approved knowledge. New generations grew up never knowing what had been lost. But a few people remembered. A few people had hidden books before the purge, and they passed them down in secret, preserving what the Council wanted erased. Marcus's grandmother had been one of those guardians. She'd given him his first book when he was 10 years old, a battered copy of something called To Kill a Mockingbird. She made him promise to remember, to preserve, to pass it on. The council preserves all knowledge, the speaker declared, his harmonic voice carrying absolute certainty. The archive is perfect and complete. Physical books are dangerous because they can be altered, corrupted. They spread misinformation. That's exactly backward, Marcus said, and now his voice carried passion that made several delegates lean forward. The archive is controlled. You decide what information exists. You've erased thousands of years of human history and philosophy because it didn't fit your approved narrative. Careful, human, the Crix delegate clicked. You tread dangerously close to sedition. I tread close to truth, Marcus shot back. Do you want to know what's in these books? One is a novel about injustice and standing up for what's right even when society opposes you. One is a collection of poems about love and loss and the human experience. And one, he pulled out a slim volume, is a historical account of what happens when governments control all information. It's about a place called Nazi Germany, where book burnings were used to erase ideas the regime didn't like. The chamber fell silent. We have records of Nazi Germany in the archive, the Lumina delegate pulsed. Do you? Marcus challenged. Have you actually checked, or do you just trust that the information is there? Because I can tell you, as someone who studied both the archive and original human sources, entire concepts have been erased. The archive's version of human history is sanitized, simplified, stripped of anything that might make people question authority or think independently. Gritz Filey stood, his massive form trembling. Your Honor, my client is clearly disturbed. The stress of this trial? I'm not disturbed, Marcus interrupted. I'm informed, and that's what terrifies you all. He turned to address the entire council now. I've spent 10 years researching this. It's not just human history that's been altered. I've found Tarragon scholars who remember philosophical texts that no longer exist in the archive. Crick's religious documents that have been simplified. Even Vex harmonic histories that had been edited to remove inconvenient truths about your species' past. The chamber erupted again, but this time with a different energy. Marcus could see it in their body language, in the way some delegates were looking at each other with what might have been doubt. Every species in this council has had its past rewritten to serve the narrative of order and compliance, Marcus continued. The archive isn't a library, it's a prison for ideas. And physical books, the books you've banned, they're the only proof that another version of history ever existed. The speaker's crystalline form flickered through several colors that Marcus's implant translated as confusion and anger. These are serious accusations, human. Do you have proof? I have these. Marcus held up his books. Proof that information the archive claims never existed in any form is in fact real and documented. I have more hidden away. Thousands of books from dozens of species, all preserved by secret librarians who knew that someday someone would need to remember. The speaker was silent for a long moment. Then, the council will adjourn to discuss this matter. As the delegates filed out in confusion and heated discussion, Gwix approached Marcus. That was either the bravest or the stupidest thing I've ever seen, the Tarragon rumbled. You've either saved yourself or guaranteed that they'll make an example of you. Marcus clutched his satchel tighter. Inside were just 3 books, but they represented something greater. They represented memory, truth, the fundamental human belief that information should be free, that knowledge belonged to everyone, not controlled by the powerful. My grandmother told me something, Micah said quietly. She said that humans have always been the ones willing to die for ideas. Other species value survival above all else, but humans, we value truth. We value freedom, even if it costs us everything. That's what makes you crazy, Griggs said, but there was something like respect in his voice. Maybe, Marcus smiled slightly, but it's also what makes us human. The council chamber doors sealed shut, leaving Marcus alone with his books and his convictions, waiting to see if his act of preservation would spark a revolution or end with his execution in the quantum void. The deliberation. 3 hours passed while Marcus waited in a small holding cell adjacent to the council chamber. The cell was comfortable enough. designed for temporary detention rather than punishment. But the comfort did nothing to ease the knot of anxiety in his stomach. Through the transparent wall, he could see his lawyer Grix pacing back and forth, occasionally glancing at a datapad that showed nothing. The council's deliberations were private. No information leaked out until they were ready to announce their decision. Marcus spent the time reading. He'd been allowed to keep his satchel, probably because the council assumed the books were evidence rather than weapons. He pulled out the poetry collection, a worn volume of work by poets from across Earth's history, his grandmother's favorite. "Hope is the thing with feathers," he read quietly, "that perches in the soul and sings the tune without the words, and never stops at all." Emily Dickinson had written those words centuries before humanity reached the stars. She lived in a small town, rarely leaving her home, yet her words had traveled across time and space to this moment. That was the power of books. They made the temporary permanent. They gave voices to the voiceless. The unexpected ally. The holding cell door slid open. Marcus looked up, expecting Grix or perhaps a guard to escort him back to the chamber. Instead, he found himself facing Illumina, the ethereal being pulsing with colors his implant struggled to translate. "I am Delegate Shimmersong," the being communicated directly through Marcus's neural implant. "I have come to speak with you privately before the council reconvenes." Marcus stood, uncertain of the protocol. "I'm not sure if I should be speaking with a council member without my lawyer present." "This is not about the trial," Shimmersong pulsed, the colors shifting to something his implant labeled urgent honesty. "This is about truth. You said in the chamber that Lumina historical records have been altered. How did you know this?" Marcus carefully pulled a small data chip from his satchel. "One of the books I preserved wasn't actually a physical book. It was a data backup, copied from the archive 15 years ago by a Lumina scholar named Breitzinger. She compared the archive's current records with the backup and found massive discrepancies." Shimmersong's colors flickered rapidly. "Breitzinger was my mentor. She disappeared 10 years ago. The council claimed she had transcended to a higher plane of existence, a natural part of Lumina aging." "She didn't transcend," Marcus said gently. "She was erased, like the information she tried to protect. I only have her backup because she sent it to my grandmother before she vanished." The Lumina was silent for a long moment, their colors muted to a dull gray. "Why didn't you mention this in the trial?" "Because I wasn't sure if any of you would believe me, and because accusing the council of murder seemed like a good way to end up in the quantum void before it could make my case." The hidden truth. Shimmersong floated closer. "The council reconvenes in 1 hour. In that time, I must tell you something that will determine not just your fate, but possibly the fate of every species under council governance." The luminous colors shifted to a pattern Marcus had never seen before. His implant offered no translation. It was as if Shimmersong was speaking in a language so old or so secret that even the universal translators didn't recognize it. 3,000 years ago, when the Galactic Council was formed, it was created with noble intentions. The founding species had all experienced devastating wars caused by conflicting ideologies, by different interpretations of history, by groups who used information as a weapon. The archive was meant to prevent that. One truth, one history, one shared knowledge base. But somewhere along the way, preservation became control, Marcus said. Exactly. And not all council members know this. Most believe, as I did, that the archive is complete and honest. But there is a secret council within the council. 5 members of the oldest species who actually control what information is preserved and what is erased. Marcus felt his blood run cold. So the trial, my case, it doesn't matter. This secret council will just erase me like they erased Breitzinger. Perhaps, or perhaps you have given me the weapon I need to fight back. Shimmersong's colors brightened to something almost hopeful. You humans have a saying, the truth will set you free. My species has a similar concept, but we had forgotten it. We call it the first light, the idea that some knowledge is so fundamental that suppressing it darkens the soul itself. The gambit. When Marcus was escorted back to the council chamber, he immediately noticed the change in atmosphere. The delegates weren't just sitting in their designated spaces. They were clustered in groups, engaged in heated discussions that stopped abruptly when he entered. The speaker's crystalline form was flickering rapidly between colors, a sign Marcus had learned meant stress. Human Marcus Webb, the council has debated your case extensively. Before we announce our decision, Delegate Shimmersong has requested permission to present additional testimony. Shimmersong floated to the center of the chamber, positioning themselves beside Marcus. Honored council, I must confess something. For the past 15 years, I have also been a keeper of forbidden knowledge. When my mentor Breitsinger vanished, she left me with evidence that our archive has been systematically altered. I have copies of historical records from my own species that no longer exist in the official archive. The chamber exploded with noise. Several delegates demanded explanations. Others accused Shimmersong of sedition. The Quicks delegation chittered so rapidly that the translation system gave up and just displayed error messages. Order, the speaker boomed. Delegate Shimmersong, these are serious accusations. Do you have proof? I have what the human has. Original sources that contradict the archive. And I suspect that if we investigate, we will find that others in this chamber have also noticed discrepancies between their species' remembered history and what the archive claims. A Tarragon delegate Marcus didn't recognize slowly stood. I have noticed such discrepancies. I thought it was merely the fallibility of memory. But if others have observed the same phenomenon. One by one, delegates began admitting they had noticed inconsistencies. Historical events that their grandparents remembered differently. Cultural practices that seemed to have been simplified or removed from official records. Philosophical texts that people swore had existed but could no longer be found. The revolution of memory. The speaker's form had settled into a deep purple color. If what you all claim is true, then the foundation of the Galactic Council itself is compromised. The archive is the pillar upon which our entire system of governance stands, which is exactly why a small group has worked so hard to control it, Shimmersong said. Knowledge is power, and if one group controls all knowledge, they control everything. Marcus stepped forward. There's a solution. Humans learned it the hard way, after centuries of watching governments and corporations try to control information. The solution is decentralization and redundancy. Multiple archives, physical backups, freedom of information. Chaos, one of the Crix delegates clicked. That would lead to misinformation, conflicting records, confusion. It would lead to truth, Marcus countered, or at least the ability to pursue truth. Yes, people could lie. They could create false records. But when information is free and multiple sources exist, lies become harder to maintain. The truth has a way of surfacing when it's not being actively suppressed. This human speaks wisdom. A delegate from a species Marcus didn't recognize said, My people have a saying. A single flame can be extinguished, but 1,000 flames become a fire that illuminates all darkness. The verdict. The speaker was silent for a long time. The crystalline being's form cycled through dozens of colors, as internal processes Marcus couldn't understand played out. Finally, the speaker spoke. The Council has never faced a crisis like this in its 3,000-year history. We are confronted with evidence that our most fundamental institution may have been corrupted. This cannot be resolved in a single trial. Marcus felt his hopes sinking. This was it. They were going to dismiss his case and sweep everything under the rug. Therefore, the speaker continued, I am declaring a mistrial. Human Marcus Webb, you are released pending a full investigation into the archive. Furthermore, I am proposing to the full council that we establish a new committee composed of representatives from all species to audit the archive against all available independent sources. Your Honor, one of the Crix delegates protested, independent sources are illegal under the Accords. Then perhaps the Accords need to be amended, the speaker replied, and Marcus could hear something like steel in that harmonic voice. Delegate Shimmersong, I am appointing you to lead this committee. Human Marcus Webb, I am requesting that you serve as an advisor, bringing your knowledge of physical preservation techniques. Marcus felt Grix's massive paw land on his shoulder in congratulation. Around the chamber, delegates were erupting into discussions again, but this time the tone was different. There was excitement, uncertainty, but also something that felt like hope. "Honored speaker," Marcus said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "I accept, and I'd like to make one request. Let my first act as advisor be to donate these 3 books to a new library. A public library, accessible to all species, where information is shared freely rather than controlled." The speaker's form brightened to a warm gold color. "Request granted. Let the records show that today the Galactic Council took its first step toward remembering what we had forgotten. That knowledge, like light itself, is meant to be shared, not hoarded." The beginning, 6 months later, Marcus stood in the first Galactic Public Library, watching as delegates from across known space examined physical books for the first time. The building had been constructed on a neutral moon, designed to house not just human books, but preserve knowledge from every species. Shimmer Song floated beside him, their colors content and peaceful. "Your grandmother would be proud." "She knew," Marcus said softly. "She always knew that eventually people would want to remember. They'd want truth more than comfortable lies." The investigation into the archive had revealed exactly what Marcus and Shimmersong had suspected. A secret council of 5 elders had been systematically altering records for over 1,000 years, slowly shaping galactic culture to be more compliant, more obedient, less questioning. Those 5 were now in custody, facing trials of their own. "You humans had a strange relationship with knowledge," Shimmersong observed. "Other species view it as a tool or a resource, but you treat it almost like a sacred trust." And Burkus picked up a book from a nearby shelf, another donation from a hidden library keeper. This one was from the Tarragon homeworld, a philosophical text about the nature of memory and identity that had been erased from the archive 200 years ago. "Because that's what it is," Marcus said. "Every book ever written, every piece of information ever recorded, it's a human reaching across time saying, 'I existed, I thought, I mattered.' To erase that isn't just destroying data, it's erasing someone's existence." He looked around the library, at species from across the galaxy, reading, learning, discovering knowledge that had been hidden from them. Some were angry at what they were learning. Others were excited. All of them were finally free to know their own history. "The Galactic Council will never be the same," Shimmersong said. "Good," Marcus replied. "It was broken. Now maybe we can build something better, something where every species, every person, has the right to know, to remember, to preserve their own truth." As the sun set on that neutral moon, casting long shadows through the library windows, Marcus thought about his grandmother, about all the secret librarians across the galaxy who had preserved books when it was forbidden, who had remembered when forgetting would have been easier. They had kept the flame alive, and now that flame had become a fire that would illuminate all the darkness the council had created. The last librarian had become the first librarian of a new age, and in the quiet stacks of that new library, surrounded by the voices of 1,000 generations speaking across time through the pages of books, Marcus finally understood what his grandmother had meant. Humans didn't just preserve knowledge, they believed in it. They believed that truth was worth fighting for, dying for, preserving at any cost. It was what made them dangerous to tyrants. It was what made them human, and it was what would change the galaxy forever.